We're taking a look back at the biggest political turning points, trends, and controversies as we hit rewind on Rising. We've got the power players, scandals, and outrageous decisions that have defined our conversations.
Last Friday, Brian Kohberger was taken into custody at his parents' home in Effort, Pennsylvania, in connection with the murders of 4 Idaho college students. The 28-year-old graduate student was pursuing a PhD in criminology at the Washington State University, about 10 miles away from the crime scene. Moscow Police Chief James Fry told ABC News that Kohberger is believed to be the only suspect in the high-profile case and that no other arrests are likely to be made.
The suspect's family released a statement following his arrest, expressing their sadness for the families of the victims, saying that they have cooperated fully with law enforcement to, quote, seek the truth and promote his presumption of innocence. Joining us now to discuss is senior national correspondent for News Nation, Brian Entin. Welcome, Brian. So,
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you. This is obviously the break in the case we were all very hoping would come soon. Can you tell us, what led to this arrest and elaborate on? So you're in Pennsylvania right now. So obviously this is a totally different state across the country from where this took place. You fill us in on what you've been reporting on.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really saw this coming, that this would now end on literally the other side of the country from Idaho. I'm in Monroe County, Pennsylvania right now, where the hearing for Brian Kohberger will be happening this afternoon. It's expected to be quick because, he said his lawyer says that he's going to waive his extradition hearing and will not fight being brought back to Idaho. So he may be back in Idaho as early as tonight. In terms of what led to release the probable cause affidavit, they tell us that they won't release that until he is back on the ground in Idaho. Apparently, there's an Idaho law that they can't release that affidavit until he's physically back in the state. But from what we can gather, it seems that they were tracking him for quite some time, at least several days. They must have had some kind of evidence. His attorney, his public defender, told me that he drove Brian Kohberger, the suspect, drove in mid-December in a white Honda Elantra from Washington State University, where he was a PhD student, which is very, very close to Moscow, Idaho, where the murders happened. That he drove from Washington to Pennsylvania mid-December with his father in a white Honda Elantra. And you'll remember that's the car that police have been looking for. So clearly the car was some part of the connection. DNA likely also involved, but we're still waiting to get all those details.
So we're trying to obviously to learn more about him, and there's been a lot of reporting on what can be gleaned about him from social media and various places. I understand he's a militant vegan. He refused to even eat food off plates that had pots that had been used to cook meat. There's discussion of possible drug issues, a kind of loner personality being described, and then somewhat intriguingly, someone studying criminology and that kind of thing. What sort of profile is being constructed of this guy?
So, yeah, it's interesting what you say about him being vegan. We've confirmed that even in the jail here in Monroe County that he's getting vegan food. You mentioned he was very strict about it. His aunt has said that when he came to visit, he wouldn't eat off of her pots and pans that have ever touched meat. She had to buy all new pots and pans. Clearly very intense in that way. He studied criminal justice, and then he was getting his PhD in criminology right now at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. So certainly an interesting background. I should also point out, he claims that he's innocent through his public defender, that he plans to fight all of these charges. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
So you mentioned that there are not other suspects being investigated right now. It seems like there's a relatively high degree of confidence that this is the suspect that they're looking for at this time. Yet we don't know anything at all about what led the police to zero in, apart from this evidence about the make and model of the car. Was there any DNA evidence or anything of that sort?
So there are reports that there was DNA evidence, ancestral DNA that initially linked Kohberger to the crimes. Again, like full roadmap of what led to the arrest until we get probable is connected. And obviously, again, the car that he was in, I mean, you had the whole country looking for that white Hyundai Elantra. And he does have that car. So, they've searched the car now. They've done search warrants at a couple of different scenes. His parents' house here in Pennsylvania. Also, his office. He had an office because he was a PhD student. So they searched his office at Washington State University and also his apartment.
Well, I know. I'm sure the families of the victims are very, glad to see an arrest in this case. Obviously, the process needs to play out, and we need to. Obviously, the public needs to know whatever the police know that led them to conclude that this is likely the person. But I think it had been so long. People, I think, were not necessarily expecting an immediate break in the case. But did you get the sense that perhaps the police were onto him for some time, and it was just a matter of locating him, or they really, in the last, I don't know, week or however long it's been, just, they got onto him and then they found him?
Yeah. Sorry, you were breaking up a little because of the service out here in Pennsylvania. It's kind of a rural area. It's not so good. We definitely get the sense that they were following him for quite some time. We don't know exactly how long at this point. Police were so tight-lipped throughout the process. So that's something we're eager to learn about.
Yeah, well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you staying on top of the story, which we will continue to follow. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
More Rising right after this. Brian Kohberger, the suspect in the murder of 4 Idaho college students, is scheduled to appear in court on June 26 for a preliminary hearing. Posts that Kohberger made as a teenager on a forum website called Tapatalk reveal an anxious, depressed, and suicidal person who wrote of not being able to feel emotions and being able to do, quote, whatever I want with little remorse. Of his family, he wrote, quote, as I hug my family, I look into their faces, I see nothing. It is like I am looking at a video game, but less. Very chilling stuff. Obviously, that helps us get more into the head of someone who could possibly commit this just utterly despicable crime, possibly against people he didn't even really seem to know, or at least there's no reason to think they knew who he was. They might have been strangers to him or just people he'd seen on the street or had some casual knowledge of. Not that if they had wronged him, it would make it okay that he murdered him, but to do this to people he had no even grievance with or something. It's
senseless. It feels senseless, and that's part of what's so scary about it. I think that the reason people, when these horrible crimes happen, are looking for a motive. It's because as the casual viewer, you're looking to see
affirm
that it couldn't be you.
You're looking for, well, they did, even if that doesn't justify it or make it like, well, but I wouldn't find myself in that situation because I don't have a public feud with someone, or I didn't, and that's run over my
scary
neighbor's lawn or something.
Right. Well, that's what's so scary about this, and what sounds like a kind of personality disorder potentially. I'm no psychiatrist, but whether or not he's ultimately diagnosed with some kind of, sociopathy or something like that. I mean, a lot of people who have those kind of personality disorders, they obviously never do anything. Like most people overwhelmingly, no matter how kind of atypical one's orientation to the family and having certain kind of normative feelings, et cetera, never get to a point where you're murdering multiple people in the dead of night as violently as what happened here. But it does, I don't know, it's chilling. It really puts I don't want to say cherry, but it really kind of gilds what is already a really stunning and horrific story here. Yeah, well, the former attorney to the Idaho murder suspect, Brian Kohberger, says he believes that the case against the murder suspect could be attacked. Attorney Jason Labar said in an interview last week that while the circumstantial evidence is strong, if individually taken, it can be attacked, which, I think is true. His attorney is going to mount a defense. He's entitled to the strong defense. The government has to make its case. But, look, what evidence do we have so far?
He's right. The DNA evidence on the sheath for the knife was left at the scene. His car seen at the scene of the murder. And now you have, don't these, well, you tell me, you're the attorney. I know this wasn't your area of specialty, but do those statements he made on those forums, are they going to make their way to the trial? Is that...
That's the kind of character evidence that I think that you typically try to keep out. It's going to be difficult. Jury selection is going to be an issue. How much people just are aware of the case, and if they can appropriately exclude all the people who
covered case.
Right. I mean, you can always find someone who's not paying attention to the news that closely. But yeah, generally speaking, unless they're, let me not try to reach back to my evidence class from 15 years ago. But generally speaking, that kind of character evidence, unless it goes to honesty, like you're on trial for stealing something and you've previously been convicted of embezzling from your company, things like that, or used for impeachment purposes. So you get on the stand and you're attesting to your truthfulness. So then you bring evidence in that you were previously a dishonest person, et cetera, things like that. But generally speaking, he might bring his own psychological state into play as part of his defense. But certainly those kind of statements.
They could bring that in, maybe? Yeah, hard to know.
I wouldn't most people choose not to put people on the stand for exactly this kind of reason, because it does open the door to a lot of damning evidence.
Yeah. Although we had some higher profile trials recently, maybe it's not recent anymore, where putting the person on the stand, Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand, I think is viewed as was very good for his case, ended up helping him. Obviously, this is entirely different circumstances. I'm not sure you'd want to put Brian Kohberger on the stand. It looks, it's, I guess, circumstantial evidence. It looks very compelling. I can't imagine them having much difference. I mean, maybe he pleads to something and then we don't. They say it always takes one on the jury, but it seems like a slam dunk case to me.
I can't begin to predict the sympathies of American jurors and the American public. Look, we had this conversation that I don't mean to relitigate it, but there are people who are sympathetic, very sympathetic to someone like Kyle Rittenhouse, who one could argue put himself into danger, endangered the public, carrying a gun into a violent area, created an unsafe situation. Even if you think that he was justified in shooting those people in self-defense, that ideally he wouldn't have ever been there and that situation never should have emerged. At the same time, they will be very unsympathetic of a 13-year-old allegedly trying to steal a car and getting shot dead, and then might be sympathetic of, I don't know if you saw the video of the little toddler walking around with a loaded gun in an apartment complex a few days ago. Someone saw and was able to call and defuse the situation before, God forbid, anything happened. And then they'll have a different thought and feeling and thought process there on the 6-year-old who shot his teacher, quote unquote, intentionally, but what's the mens rea of a 6-year-old? I mean, I can't even begin to predict. The reactions to all of those stories have been all over the place. I think they've been dictated by ideological priors, feelings about gun rights, racial preferences, and feelings about who deserves to have a gun and who doesn't deserve to have a gun. And I would not be surprised by anything at this point.
I don't think any of that enters in here, though. It's a utterly unsympathetic, to be clear.
But you got to see what the evidence is. You got to see what the evidence is. There are a lot of disaffected, sad youths out there. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily murderers.
No, I know, but that I don't think there's going to be sympathy for him. Yeah. I don't think there's any.
And DNA evidence,
no
I got to say,
self-defense element. There's no
DNA evidence is definitely impeachable. Like, it's not a perfect science. They tracked the DNA from the crime scene to a DNA test. His parents, had taken a DNA test. Who knows what the chain of custody issues are going to be like there. Like, there's a lot of stuff that comes out in the course of the trial.
It's his knife sheath, it's his car, and everything we learn about this guy is, that's the guy who does something like this. I mean, what? That's
okay. Well,
that's absolutely the truth.
The defense should not be putting Robbie Suave on their jury. We know that for sure.
I think that's the conclusion any jury.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's likely, but all I'm saying is I wouldn't put it past. Stranger things have happened. I guess we'll find out in June, and we'll be following that as more details unfold. More rising after this.
News Nation has exclusively learned that Pennsylvania authorities are investigating Idaho murder suspect Brian Kohberger for his potential connection to other unsolved killings. This revelation broke just last night, so here to fill us in is senior national correspondent at News Nation, Brian Entin. Great to see you, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Please elaborate. What is this latest news that authorities are interested in Kohberger potentially having been involved in murders, I would gather, previous to what happened in Idaho?
Yeah, previous to what happened in Idaho, we don't have a ton of detail, but we have confirmed that they are looking into Kohberger for at least two murders that happened in Pennsylvania. We don't know if they've, made significant headway in connecting him to those homicides. We just know that they were and are possibly still looking into a possible connection.
And refresh our memories, he was in Pennsylvania at some point prior to coming to the campus in Idaho. He was a student there. Can you refresh us of the timeline?
Yeah, so he grew up in Pennsylvania. He went to high school in Pennsylvania. He went to college and got his master's in Pennsylvania. So he lived most of his life in Pennsylvania. He had just moved out to Washington State, which, right next to University of Idaho, where the murders happened, pretty recently. So most of his life was spent out in Pennsylvania. He got his master's at DeSales University. So he was there for quite a bit of time during his adult life.
So, Brian, I just wanted to ask a little bit about this individual. He's obviously an educated person. Is there anything in his profile that we know of that would lead people to believe that perhaps he would be a serial killer? Was there something strange about him in his upbringing that would lead people to potentially believe that he would be this guy?
Well, we've talked to a lot of people who knew him while he was growing up, who say, that he was quiet, that he was reserved, that he didn't have a lot of friends, that he never really had a girlfriend, and that he was kind of a loner. He was bullied at one point, and overweight. In terms of any evidence that would show that he's committed a serial killing before, we haven't come across any hard evidence. Of course, he's just accused at this point. But I mean, if he is responsible for these murders in Idaho, a lot of times it's not someone's first time. And he's been studying criminology for so long. He got his master's in criminology. He was now getting his PhD in criminology. So he was very familiar with that field.
I mean, that's just very, very disturbing because it, raises the possibility, I guess, that he had gotten away with some other crime or murder for a very long period of time. So obviously, after what happened at Idaho, it was we were still kind of marveling at how long it took authorities to find and arrest a suspect. But still, that was a matter of of a few weeks versus this. It could have been a much longer period of time at which he had eluded authorities.
Yeah, it could have been. And I don't want to blow it out of proportion because, it's not totally unusual for authorities to go back through cold cases and unsolved murders when you have a situation like this and try to see, is it possible that, that someone we've now caught could be connected. So I think that's what's happening right now behind the scenes. And again, we don't know of any specific evidence at this point connecting him to certain murders. We just know that they are investigating and they are trying to see if those connections exist.
And a connection to, and I know it hasn't really been explained yet, but to multiple murders, not just one specific case. Has that been explained yet?
Yeah, it's our understanding at least two potential unsolved murders in Pennsylvania.
Is there any reason that he would have made that trip or at least moved cross country from Pennsylvania to Washington? And is it possible that he was trying to elude authorities by making the move cross country?
I don't think that's the reason. I mean, he moved out to Washington State to get his PhD in criminology, so he was currently enrolled in getting his PhD out there. He had applied to the program out there and been accepted, and he was starting the process. He was, a TA. He was teaching classes out there. So, I don't think he was necessarily trying to run away from anything. I think that's just where he got into school, to get his PhD.
Do we have any updates on how well he knew the victims in Idaho? I think last when I checked in on this, there was more evidence that he'd been, contacting them on Instagram. Do we know more about, whether he'd had interactions with them in person, or more than just the one victim who he had continuously kind of tried to contact on social media? What's the state of that understanding, or why he picked them, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't know a lot more. There are the reports that he messaged several of the victims, and that they found those messages on his cell phone, and that they went into sort of like the unread folder on the victim's cell phone. So like if you get a message from someone you don't know and you're not friends with, it will go into this folder where you may not even see it. Beyond that, we don't know much more. The other new reporting that we just confirmed last night, though, which is kind of interesting, with Kohberger is you may remember the University of Idaho was able to obtain the house where the murders happened. The homeowner gave the house up to the University of Idaho, and that the university planned to tear it down, and they were going to do that very, very soon, just within the next couple of weeks. They are now not going to do that right away. There's been some concern from the families saying, hey, like, what if the jury wants to tour the house? We don't think it's a good idea to tear it down. So now the university is going out to the prosecution and the defense to see if they have any objections to the house being torn down. One side likely will. And then the university says they're going to go to the judge and let the judge make a ruling. So that's kind of interesting, because we thought the house was going to be torn down very, very soon, and now that's not going to happen.
That is very interesting. I also know that Kohberger, will be eligible for the death penalty. Have the families given any indication how they, feel about that kind of issue?
So the Gonzalez family has alluded to the fact that they would be pro-death penalty. The other families haven't commented on it at this point. It's tricky right now for the families because there's this gag order in place, and it doesn't specifically say they can't talk, but it sort of does at the same time. It's kind of like a weird gray area. So they're not really commenting on a lot of those questions. But, in Idaho, the governor just signed a new law that they'll now have a firing squad as an option for the death penalty in Idaho. It's hard to get the drugs right now for lethal injection. And so they've had to put off some executions in the past. So now if the drugs aren't available, which oftentimes they will actually have a firing squad in Idaho. So that could be a possibility for Kohberger if it gets to that point.
Which I know it probably sounds grisly to a lot of people. Although I've heard arguments that a firing squad is a more immediate way to go out than the drug combination, where people might be in a state of pain and they might actually survive it, and it's not nearly as humane as people have been led to believe. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
And we'll have more Rising right after this. Idaho prosecutors are seeking the death penalty in their case against Brian Kohberger, who is accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students in their off-campus home last November. If convicted, Kohberger could actually face a firing squad.
Defense attorneys for the suspect claimed in court documents filed earlier this year that DNA from other unidentified men was found at the crime scene. Kohberger's defense also claimed there is, quote, no connection linking him to the 4 victims. A recent filming reads, quote, there is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Kohberger's apartment, office, home, or vehicle. Yeah, so we covered this a great deal when it happened. It was an incredibly grisly crime that ended up being sleuthed out by some really interesting corroborating evidence. There was at first absolutely nothing that seemed to connect the crimes to a victim, a perpetrator, and then we got all of this camera footage of a car on the street at the time, et cetera. And now they've gotten to this point. Is there a robust discussion being had now about the legitimacy of the death penalty, as often happens in this case? There's often, even the family of the victims will have a principled objection to the death penalty, whereas sometimes the high-profile nature and grisly nature of a crime like this does raise questions about whether or not it is at times appropriate for some people.
Sure. So my view of the death penalty, so I'm generally opposed to the death penalty because there have been cases where the authorities have wrongfully executed someone who was innocent. We know that there have been cases. We know that people have confessed under psychologically manipulative and long, lengthy interrogations to crimes that it's later proven because of DNA evidence that they could not have committed.
Yes.
And you can't make restitution to someone you have executed wrongly.
Right.
That is the basis on which I oppose it. I don't really have a I don't have like a it's wrong to take a life kind of thing about it. I think in cases where the guilt of the person is, again, I would not give the state this power, but I'm not necessarily perturbed by it in cases where the guilt of the person is like so overwhelmingly likely. I mean, I would reserve it for a mass killing or something, like mass shootings like the Boston bombers or the people like that. I am perfectly fine with them enacting it. It's not my policy choice generally.
What about the expense argument that the appeals process is just so expensive, and there are understandably due process concerns when execution is at play that allow for a substantive appeals process, and that it's cheaper simply to incarcerate someone for life?
I mean, incarcerating someone for life is also quite costly.
No, but this is not, I'm not making this up. It is more expensive to kill people, to execute people, because of the legal processes that you have to go through to get to that point.
Right, and to me, imprisoning someone is a pretty harsh, forever is also a pretty
Some might even argue
thing.
worse.
Some people who commit horrific crimes for ideologically motivated reasons actually hope to be killed and martyred, especially when it's a religious thing in context. What I find interesting here, we should talk about the firing squad angle. So that's because this state is one of very few states that actually has a law saying that if the drugs for the lethal injection cannot be procured, firing squad can be used instead. A lot of people probably say that sounds medieval and insane, but there are a lot of good arguments that the firing squad is a more humane method of execution than lethal injection. Including Sonia Sotomayor, in one of her opinions, has actually went into this in the opinion, saying that she has weighed those arguments and thinks they're compelling. That death is more likely and instantaneous. I was reading statistics of botched executions over time. No matter what method is employed, there is some very small percentage of executions that fail. The failure rate of firing squad was lower. There were fewer. There were practically zero. Versus lethal injection, which is not necessarily less painful. It's prolonged and protracted. It's easier on the people watching it because there's something visceral about watching someone shot. Yeah. It's not necessarily easier on the person enduring it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't have any substantive problem with the firing squad, and I frankly think that lethal injection allows people to hide behind the idea of civility in an act that is not in any way civil. My objection to the death penalty, in addition to the expense argument, the ambiguity about guilt and innocence argument, the inability to make amends or restitutions if someone is later cleared by the evidence, is that I think providing the power to the state to commit murder degrades society and the state more broadly. And it's precisely because it is, I believe, an immoral and violent act that is made obvious when you're lining someone up before a firing squad. So if anything, I would frankly probably prefer we just be honest about what we're doing and have those more kind of visceral sorts of executions if it makes people reckon with what we're really doing here substantively as a society.
The method of execution is actually another powerful example of so-called experts or scientific or medical experts getting in there with their own agenda. That was the case of death by electrocution, the electric chair, which has a stunningly high failure rate. The first couple times it was tried, it was just torturing the person. They survived because the people pushing that were all about selling these chairs, selling this execution method. Honestly, they have not come up with a more humane method than the beheading people with the guillotine, which is quick and immediate.
Well, let's for a second talk about some of the evidence. Obviously, as we read in the read up top, Kohberger's defense attorneys are questioning the connection between him and the crime. There was a recovery of a DNA sample from a knife sheath. This was reported earlier this year that was found in one of the victim's beds that appeared to be a strong match for Kohberger. That language, appeared to be a strong match, is an interesting way to frame that. Not clear why there is that degree of ambiguity. And of course, as I mentioned in passing, passing, some of the earliest evidence was that the car that he was in had been traced to the scene. So this white sedan, later identified as a Hyundai Elantra, was traveling toward the home at 3:30 a.m., making several passes by the house, and then leaving the area around 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed. Security footage from the campus of Washington State University, where Kohberger was a grad student, showed a similar white sedan headed in the direction of Moscow, the city, not, in the American city, about 15 miles away across the state line shortly before 3 a.m., and then appearing to return around 5:30 a.m. So that's obviously circumstantial, but substantive. As the kind of the alias, the timing of it all seems to have worked out. And then additionally, they tracked his cell phone pings to the location, which again, that kind of evidence has been interrogated and disputed in a lot of trials because it can be very broad and imprecise. But that's what they have.
Yes, and look, he is innocent until proven guilty. He is entitled to a robust defense. It is absolutely appropriate for his defense attorneys to try to call into question this evidence or talk about the ambiguous nature or the circumstantial nature. All that said, I find the evidence extremely compelling. I think there's no real doubt that it is him. I expect that he will be convicted. The process should play out. But they have the car, they have the knife, his location. I mean, his history of interacting on social media with the victims. It seems fairly cut and dry to me, but of course, I'm not the jury, and they'll make their decision based on what they hear, as is appropriate. But yeah. I think they got him in this case, but we'll see.
And we'll give you any additional updates on this case, and stick around for more Rising after this.